So we are ready to begin this session, and the tradition with this conference has been that the session begins with the blowing of the conch bell, the Shankhnad. Professor M.D. Prasad will now. We will now have Vedic chanting by Swami Yogatmananda from the Vedanta Society of Providence and Swami Akshyanananda from the Vedanta Society of Greater Washington.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. Vang me manasi pratisthita mano me vachi pratishthitam aviravir mahedhi vedasya mahanistha shrutam me magrahasi anenadi nahuradran sandhami ritam vadishyami satyam vadishyami tanmamavatu tadvaktaram avatu mam avatu vaktaram Om Shanti 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 Sahanavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviram Paravahai Teyasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai Om Shanti 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 Om Bhadram Karnayabhih Shrunyamadeva Bhadram Pashyamakshapiryajatrah Sthirairangaiः Sushruvarum Sastanubhih Vyashirmadevahitam yadhayu Om Shanti 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 Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om.
Now Swami Yogatmananda will be doing the benediction.
Namo Brahmadibhyo Brahma Vidya Sambhadaya Kartubhyo Vamsharishibhyo Namo Gurubhyo. For the respected delegates of this Vedanta Congress, International Vedanta Congress, and others who are attending it. Dear friends, let us invoke the prayer that I chanted is the invoking of the blessings of all the great sages who have brought this tradition to us, the continued tradition of the wisdom of Vedas that has been conveyed to this time through this lineage of great sages who have practiced those things, cultivated those things, adopted those things to their times, and thus have handed this treasure to us. That is why before beginning of these studies it is traditionally told that we should invoke the lineage of all those great sages through whom this wisdom comes to us. We all are aware that in present times as well, how important is this study and propagation of the brilliant life-giving ideas of Vedanta as philosophy, as well as religion, as way of life, and the great contribution that Vedanta can make in many parts. We can just summarize it on this occasion that it brings all mankind together. It removes the disharmony or discord between many different streams of knowledge, and in general presents a harmonious view of the reality. And so I will conclude invoking the presence of all Vedanta sages and the divine presence that may this Vedanta Congress be successful. I will quote a sentence from Swami Vivekananda, a passage from Swami Vivekananda's lecture on practical Vedanta. All the powers in the universe are already ours. It is we who have put our hands before our eyes and cry that it is dark. Know that there is no darkness around us. Take the hands away and there is the light which was from the beginning. Darkness never existed. Weakness never existed. We who are fools and cry that we are weak. We who are fools cry that we are impure. Thus Vedanta not only insists that the ideal is practical, but that it has been so all the time. And this ideal, this reality is our own nature. Everything else that you see is false, untrue. As soon as you say, I am a little mortal being, you are saying something which is not true. You are giving the lie to yourself. You are hypnotizing yourself into something vile and weak and wretched. The Vedanta recognizes no sin, it only recognizes error. And the greatest error, says the Vedanta, is to say that you are weak, that you are a sinner, a miserable creature, and that you have no power and you cannot do this and that. Every time you think in that way, you, as it were, rivet one more link in the chain that binds you down. You add one more layer of hypnotism on your own soul.
Thank you, Swami Yogatmananda and Atmagyanananda Ji Maharaj. I am Sukalyan Sengupta, the director of the Center for Indic Studies, and along with Professor Balram Singh and Professor R.P. Singh, the three of us are the co-directors of this conference. So, it is my privilege and my honor to welcome you all. As you see, this is the 23rd Congress, so there have been 22 such conferences before. Since 2009, this conference is primarily organized by us meaning the Center for Indic Studies, and now we have worked out an arrangement with the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, JNU, So it's a biennial conference. So the last one was 2015 December in JNU. Now we are here, and the next one, 2019 December, around that time frame, that will again be in JNU. So that's how the system it works. My job is very, very simple. It's to make sure, we have volunteers, we have people in the registration desk. So if you have any questions, if you have any needs, we know many of you have come from India, so there are some specific circumstances that arise in terms of adapter for computer use, telephone, SIM card, whatnot. So if you have any particular need, just let us know. We'll try our best to help you. And you have with you a conference booklet. It has the schedule. We'll try to stay as much as possible. I'm sure many of you have met old friends, you have made new friends, but we all have a common enemy, and that enemy is time. So we need to be aware of that. As I said, we have many delegates from India, especially a big contingent from JNU. As I said, JNU has been great in terms of not only organizing this conference whenever it happens in India, but also giving us the intellectual resources, the administrative resources to hold such a thing. So as you know, those of you who are familiar with Indian politics and all, JNU is sometimes called Kremlin on the Yamuna. And by our modest efforts, we have made JNU Indic Cultural Sentinel on the Buzzards Bay, which is the nearest water body to us. So it might be a very small transformation, could be a big transformation, who knows. All right, so this conference, it began almost 50 years ago, and we are so privileged to have with us Professor Ramarao Pappu. He is the one who started this conference, and Professor Pappu, he was at Miami University in Ohio. He held this conference at his campus for many times. But after he retired, we made this deal with JNU and Umass Dartmouth. But Professor Pappu has been very actively involved with this conference. It just so happens that his 80th birthday was celebrated a few days ago. So I would like I would now request Professor Satya Paraitam, he is a professor of Dartmouth College of Business on our campus, to our appreciation to
Good morning, everybody. And hi, good morning. Namaste. Of course, everybody knows Professor Pappu Ramarao, but he has so many shades in his life, which we would like to invite him and then give some small token of our respect. Please come, sir. So these are different shades.
This is the four stages of my life at 18. So this is brahmacharya. People thought I was a Hollywood actor. This is my grihastha ashrama. Then this is in Badrinath, me and my wife, Vanaprastha. And also, Swamiji, I have been a part of you wearing this saffron clothes in Rishikesh. When I attended the yoga conference, so they gave me these kashaya, saffron clothes. So these are my 4 stages of life. Do I look 80? No.
Do I act 80? No. Do I think 80? No. No. But I am 80. The whole thing is Maya. The fact that I am acting 80 or being 80 and all the things are Maya. Right? Absolutely.
So, Professor Pappu, could you please tell us a little bit about the history of this conference?
Okay, I think this is as good an occasion as I can think of to very briefly say about the Vedanta Congress. I am known probably after teaching at Miami University for 45 years and having spent about 54 years in this country. When I came, there were only 100,000 Indians in this country and only 3 Indian restaurants in New York. The Vedanta, when I look back at the 80, what is it that is distinctive of me in my whole career? Yeah, like everybody else, I have published a few books and lots of papers and so on. But what stands out in my own life when I reflect on that one is the starting of this Vedanta Congress. Okay. So I think, I am known as a big organizer of so many international conferences. Lots of centennial conferences I have organized. It so happened during my lifetime, at least that period of my life, all the great people's centennials took place. I started in 1969 organizing a big Gandhi Centennial Conference here. And later on, I have organized the Radhakrishnan Centennial Conference, a Centennial Conference in Swami Vivekananda's coming to America and the Parliament of Religions, and that is followed by Shankara's 1200th anniversary conference, and that was followed by Jiddu Krishnamurti's Centennial Conference, and that was followed by Jnaneshwara's 800th Sahajivan Samadhi Conference, and so on. So that so many centennial conferences, it is my fortune that all these centennial conferences came during my active years in teaching, so that my children who have celebrated my 80th birthday last week in Cincinnati, they said, "Dad, we need to celebrate your centennial conference. I hope you will be around." And so this is one of the things, when I look back on my life, what is it that is distinctive of me, which is not there in the life of ordinary professors, you see. This is one thing I am really proud of. The second thing is in terms of the academic stuff, which I have done. I'm proud to be a part of the Encyclopedia of Hinduism project 25 years ago, started by Swami Vedanta Saraswati in Rishikesh and K. Sashir Rao. Up and down, with so many hurdles it went through. And finally, 3 years ago, we have released the 11-volume Encyclopedia of Hinduism. That's one thing. The second thing is also I worked with Professor Satyananda an encyclopedia of philosophy and religions in Telugu language. In other words, getting that one. And then I am known, my wife used to say, my middle name is Conferences. And I think I would tell one example of what my daughter made fun of me of the conferences was, it was the wedding day. She told in the wedding reception, on her wedding day, I am supposed to have woken up, "Subuna, which conference I am attending?" She said, "Dad, you are not attending a conference. It is my wedding day." "Oh, yeah. It is a wedding day." And she said, "I am glad she chose to attend my wedding day instead of going to a conference." It was the same day, that's because it was on the same day the Encyclopedia of Telugu, philosophy in Telugu, was to be released by Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao in the Prime Minister's quarters. And I had a big conflict, really, because, hey, I worked for so long, and the Prime Minister is supposed to be releasing that book. On the other hand, my daughter's wedding, right? So she said, "Wait, Dad, I'm glad you chose to be here instead of going to a conference." Thank you very much.
Singh, and thanks to all the organizers, Dr. Singh, Dr. Sengupta, Dr. Ram Singh, and Dr. Papu for giving me this opportunity to come here and speak to all of you. This is definitely a challenge for me because I come from a completely different perspective, and I stand here with a lot of trepidation in front of scholars and philosophers like you. The first question I had when discussing my participation in this event, when I spoke to Dr. Ram Singh, was that I have absolutely no knowledge of Vedanta and philosophy. So you'll have to pardon my ignorance. My area of expertise is technology, innovation, and strategy. And that's what I'll be talking about a little bit, and the relation between Vedanta and these areas. I'm also here because I'm a long-term columnist. In fact, I was one of the very few people 20 years ago to write with a very strong Hindu perspective, and I've continued to do that in the face of a fair amount of derision by the prevailing leftist industry and media. But anyway, technology, innovation, and strategy, as I said, there are elements of that that are relevant to contemporary Vedanta, and that's what I'd like to speak about today. To start off, I'd like to quote something that I paraphrase from John Donne. John Donne, in one of his poems, the medieval English scholar, said that no man is an island. And today I think Vedanta is not an island. It's something that pervades a lot of other things that we're involved in. And when I say Vedanta, I look at it as broadly the contribution of Indic thought to the world, rather than purely philosophical. So I'm going to talk about 4 topics. The first is the impact of philosophy on technology. And I'd like to consider the moral and ethical dilemmas that are inherent in the rise of artificial intelligence. And this has brought the ideas from humanity and philosophy to center stage in artificial intelligence. The second topic that I would like to speak on, and if you'll pardon me for a minute, I'm going to try and set my timer so that I don't overshoot. Just 1 second. Second topic is that the proper positioning of Vedantic thought in terms of contemporary society, both in the West and in India. Although I lived in America for 20 years, now when I return, I'm astonished by how little India impinges on the collective consciousness here, contrary to what we in India imagine. This is a failure in positioning and frankly in marketing ourselves, and perception becomes reality, and therefore we need to market ourselves a lot better. A third and related thought is that of Hindu exceptionalism, which leads to the idea of the Dharmic grand narrative and its use in geostrategy. There have been ideas about the Protestant work ethic and the Confucian work ethic. Is there something similar that we can develop and define and talk about for Hindus? Because it's likely that the G2 world that we see today with China and the US leading the global enterprise will change to a G3 world, with India being one of the 3 poles. And I believe to sustain this rise, we need to have this grand narrative. And the last point is that what is a very practical way in which Vedanta can impinge on modern societies, especially using traditional knowledge systems. I want to use examples of indigenous agricultural processes or practices, or social structures such as matrilineal structures as examples. Another is the area of epistemology in general, and what Vedanta can teach the Western system, which has been considered faultless, peer-reviewed and evidence-based and so forth. I see that as being gained these days by researchers. And also, there is an assumption in the West that data is king, but it's going to be sorely tested because we're finding a tsunami of fake news, junk data, and soon we'll be finding fake video and fake audio, which you will not be able to tell from the real thing. So to jump into my first topic, Indian ideas and of morals and ethics in the age of intelligent machines. I have a computer science background and a business background, so these are areas that I have some knowledge of. Conventional wisdom suggests that artificial intelligences are well on their way to defeating humans in all sorts of endeavors. It started off with their competence in narrow areas such as chess, when, for example, IBM's Deep Blue defeated the reigning world champion Garry Kasparov in 1997. A lot of progress has been made since then, much of it in the recent past due to machine learning algorithms and neural networks. These systems only need to be fed an enormous amount of relevant data, and they can then figure out for themselves how to do certain things, just like a human child learns. We have consoled ourselves that specialized tasks are the only things that computers are clever enough to do, but that certainty is now under attack. Generalized AI, which is for all intents and purposes equivalent to humans, may be on its way. There's a techno-visionary named Ray Kurzweil. He's talked about the singularity, the point at which machines become more powerful than humans, and they can together create certain super intelligences. Interestingly enough, Kurzweil believes that after the singularity happens, intelligence will radiate outwards from the planet to the rest of the universe, which is a very interesting concept from a technology person. Now, to be looking at more mundane things, self-driving cars and trucks will be an unavoidable part of the landscape in the immediate future, perhaps in 5 years. Now, this brings a host of questions in ethics and morals that technologists seldom talk about. One issue is the quality of the data sets that self-learning machines are exposed to. It turns out that they can be biased very easily based on the fact that they have no discrimination, no quote-unquote common sense, and they believe whatever they have seen. A machine that has seen a lot of racist literature or racist films and learned from them is likely to value the life of a white person higher than that of non-whites. An interesting question is about the sense of fairness that self-driving cars may need to exhibit. In normal circumstances, a machine will do its utmost to avoid accidents. But suppose an accident is inevitable. What do you do if you're a self-driving car? And so this is the first slide I had. Normally, it would try to not go and hit somebody. But if the choice is between going and hitting a barrier and killing some people, what would a self-driving car do? And what should it do? Okay, and that is the important question. What should it do? Should it take a deontological attitude where there is an abstract sense of duty that overrides everything else? Or should it consider a purely utilitarian teleological angle and it says, well, in this instance 5 people will die, in that instance 2 people will die, therefore I choose the instance where fewer people die, right? So as a first degree of approximation, it's possible to assert that Indic dharma is inherently deontological, whereas Abrahamic systems are inherently teleological. Teleological systems are generally zero-sum, and they have winners and losers. And therefore, which of these perspectives is appropriate for androids and cyborgs? Do androids have duties? Does a self-driving car have a swadharma of its own? Because it's nearly the normal definition of personhood, because it has intelligence, it has self-awareness, and it has free will. There has been an attempt to think about swadharma by Asimov, the science fiction writer. He talks about the 3 laws of the bodies, but they're kind of simplistic and you cannot apply them in a lot of situations. My belief, from my limited understanding of Indian thought, is that we will be able to identify the core principles that a machine needs to live by to fulfill its karma. I'm reminded of a fascinating book titled Moral Dilemmas in the Mahabharata. So I'm sure that philosophers like you are very familiar with more such dilemmas that need to be included in what a self-driving car or any other automaton needs to be thinking of. When artificial intelligence is sufficiently superior to humans, what will they think of us? Will they consider us nuisances? Will they enslave us? In Western science fiction, that's pretty much standard. Speciesism, if I were to coin a new word, is rampant. And at the first opportunities, machines take over and treat humans much as we treat animals today. In Rosen's Universal Robot, the first the Czech play that created the word robot. In the Matrix series, which some of you may be familiar with, humans are oppressed by machines. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, HAL, the computer, kills off all the astronauts on board because it thinks that they may jeopardize its mission, which is its duty. And so forth. And in Blade Runner, you have the cyborgs that have an instinct of self-preservation, and they happily murder humans to save themselves. Now, so there is this antagonistic attitude, and I think it comes squarely from the biblical or Abrahamic attitudes towards other species. In the Bible, in Genesis 1:28, it says, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish in the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Now, you could not be more explicit than that. Now, this prejudice is reflected in René Descartes' thinking, and since he had a major influence on modern Western thought, it's reflected in it as well. In his Discourse on Method, he talks about humans as masters and owners of the earth, and elsewhere, he explicitly denies animals any agency or a soul. And in the broadly Western mechanistic perspective, animals have no rights. So, the sentient machine absorbs the same kind of hierarchy. I think it's entirely possible that it will invent an Abrahamic religion that has itself at the top of the totem pole. And these machines, I don't think you can see this very well, this is a timeline that talks about when people think machines will be able to do certain things. So in 2016, humans were defeated in the highest levels of Angry Birds. And in 2016 again, machines defeated humans in poker. And they can now fold laundry, they can transcribe speech. By 2020, they're able to assemble any Lego, and so on and so forth. And towards the bottom, you see that by the year 2046, they may be able to write New York Times bestsellers, perform surgery, research, mathematics, and by 2060, pretty much all human tasks will be in the realm that machines can take over. So, at that point, they may feel justified in enslaving humans and feel completely virtuous about it too, because they can do everything better than us. So this is where it goes with Hindu and Buddhist dharma, and its perspective on the sanctity of all life might do the machines a world of good. The deontological perspective of duty that assigns sanctity to all of life, and indeed even to inanimate objects, would be extremely valuable. So there is just a little bit more data showing you how artificial intelligence is really going to take over in terms of revenue. This is talking about $12 billion in the next few years, 5 to 6 years. And yeah, so that's about machines and AI and ethics. The second topic is positioning and marketing Vedanta and Dharma in India. I come from an MBA background, so I've been in marketing and sales and so forth and strategy for a long time. So this is something that I think is one of the things that Indians are not very good at. We're not good at self-marketing, self-promotion, self-aggrandizement. And when you live in India, we get the impression that the nation has begun to matter more to the world, partly because of the growth in GDP. And that's sort of what I'm indicating here. You can't see it very well, but by the year 2030, it says that China will be the largest economy in the world, the United States will be the second largest, and India will be the third largest. And this is not in PPP terms, it's in real terms. So 34 billion China, 32 billion India, and 10 billion, United States, and 10 billion, it's all trillions, India, and Japan at 6 trillion. So it's not that far off that India will be a large economic entity. In a sense, India is following the same path that China took to rise from obscurity after they opened themselves up to the world. There are, of course, differences, and most significantly, it's true that India will not be able to manufacture its way to prosperity because that, as we say, that train is left the station. And in fact, people say that India has deindustrialized too soon before reaching a reasonable per capita GDP. Even given this, I don't think India gets the respect that it deserves. Not many are aware of the fact that India has historically been one of the world's biggest economies, and it declined precipitously in the period of European Christian colonial loot. India is not a developing country, it's a redeveloping country, and that distinction is important for us to make. So it's only natural that India should wish to assert itself on the world stage. Because I lived here in the 1980s, I can remember how the fear of Japan was rampant in those days, and now there is a fear of China. But I think these may be transient. Both may reach a certain level, and they may not be as important as fear factors to the Americans. We all know what happened to Japan. They have some lost decades when their property bubble burst and the growth that they had in the past was slowed. It's possible that China could go through a similar collapse, but at the moment they are bent on world domination and they're very aggressive. It has to do probably with the Chinese perception as being superior to everybody else. They say that they are the middle kingdom in the center of the universe. They used to call everybody else Guaylo, foreign devils, and you should treat them as such, suggesting that they did nothing from the rest of the world. Now that China is asserting itself, the West is treating it with great respect, accepting that China is a civilization entity with at least 5,000 years of history, and it's taken for granted that China is taking its rightful place as one of the great economies of the world. But in direct contrast, nobody in the West gives much credence to India. The image of India continues to be caste, cows, and curries. Caste, curry, and cows, as my friend Rajiv Malhotra, who should be here the next day or two, puts it so prettily. Even more than that, I suspect that most Americans will be astonished to hear that India is in Asia. I remember a Stanford classmate of mine, an English major and a banker, being startled when I said we were Asians. I think she thought India was in the Middle East or Africa or something. So even that level of ignorance is rampant about India, and it extends to all kinds of other things. So, for example, you may know that there is a standoff between between India and China over an incursion into Bhutan, and this is very nervous-making for India because if the Chinese are able to invade there, they'll be able to cut off what's called the chicken's neck, the narrow bridge of land that connects India to the northeast. That means the northeast is gone. This is something that really terrifies Indians. But the Americans, despite all their professions of cooperation and so forth, are totally non-committal about it. So, for example, the State Department spokesperson, Heather Nauert, her name is, on July 17th said, quote unquote, both sides should work together to try to come up with something, some better sort of arrangement for peace. Lovely. I mean, you didn't need to, this is drivel, basically. They're saying, tough, deal with it yourself. Now this disdain is reflected in popular culture as well. On my last trip to the US, I noticed that the Indian character in the hit show Silicon Valley is actually played by Pakistani, despite the fact that there are thousands of Indians there. In the popular film Arrival, they talk about alien spaceships arriving in China and Russia. I expected one of them to land in India, but no, it landed in Pakistan, which I thought was interesting. So marketing is important because, perception becomes reality sooner or later. If India were to think of itself as a star, or to appear as a star, then Indians and others would adjust their expectations so that India, in fact, will become a star. There is such a thing as a self-fulfilling prophecy, and in a highly competitive world, we need to blow our own trumpet, never mind any delicacy. And this is what happened in the IT world. There was a gentleman named Vedanta, who some of you may remember. He was the guy who started NASCOM, and he kept saying India is going to be a superpower in software. And I once asked him, Devan, where do you get these numbers from? And he smiled enigmatically. I think he just made up those numbers. But everybody believed him, and sooner or later his predictions became true. The sad fact is that India is severely underestimated by many in the West, and our marketing efforts have not been very good. We need to believe in ourselves to begin with. For the longest time, the legacy of Nehruvian rule was that India internalized the self-image that it was a banana republic or a minor power, and that it should hang out with the non-aligned movement. Let us note that China, even though it kept talking about developing countries, never really participated in that because it knew it was going to be a major power. Now this chart that I have shows how the GDP of China grew, and you can also see the red, that's the blue line, and you can see how India is also growing, not as dramatically as China, but it's still growing, quite rapidly. Again, unfortunately, the NAM rhetoric also really irritated the Americans because it kept talking about evil capitalists and the deep state in the US, which, as everybody knows, is very powerful. They do not forget, but they do not forget. So that has continued to be a problem. But some of the disdain for India is reflected in the inferior position Hinduism has in the West. I have not done much research, but I don't think there are many countries in which Hinduism is a recognized religion. It is not in France, it is not in Italy, it is not in China. China has 5 recognized religions, which doesn't include India. Now, this has practical implications, as only quote-unquote recognized religions get tax benefits in most countries. Incidentally, in India also, Hinduism doesn't get tax benefits. Why? Because the income tax department's view of Hinduism is that it is a quote-unquote way of life and not a religion, therefore it doesn't get tax exemptions, which I think is pretty ridiculous, but that's the way things are. There are very few countries, I believe, that recognize Hinduism as a proper religion, which means, in a way, our entire civilization is considered barbaric by large parts of the world as a cult or something like that. Interestingly enough, many concede value to Buddhism, but not so much to India. On the ground, things are much worse. In Russia, a few years ago, an Archbishop Nikon of their Orthodox Church wrote a hateful letter to the mayor of Moscow, calling Hinduism a satanic religion and Krishna a devil, and requesting that a Hindu temple should be denied permission. And that's something that our Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam people would really internalize. You know, it's the Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam meme is not shared by everybody. So why is India disrespected so much? There are many reasons. The first is that we have not yet overcome our colonial inferiority complex. We look up to the West. Second is that we still work, read, and think in English, as we're doing right now, which remains an alien tongue with alien associations, and we internalize them. I used to think that English was a boon to India, but over time I've been convinced by people like Sankrant Sanu that that is in fact not true. There are many negative outcomes. Children becoming alienated from the local culture, the gradual death of regional languages as there is no investment in enriching them, and the double burden we place on ourselves to translate in our heads. A small but annoying problem, I think, our use of English, a second language in which we feel inferior to them, is one of the reasons foreign correspondents in India, especially in Delhi, inevitably begin to despise Indians, and their reports bash India all the time. It's extremely annoying. For example, The Economist or The Guardian or the New York Times in particular, they're so negative about India. I think if you forced all these foreign correspondents to actually learn Sanskrit to be able to report from India, they'd be a lot more respectful automatically. Third, we're not forceful in asserting ourselves. It's easy for others to capture our intellectual property because, in a way, we collaborate with them. I'm pretty sure Chinese will not betray Chinese interests to a foreigner. And you hear of Chinese and Taiwanese and even Chinese Americans being caught passing state secrets in the US to China. But I've never yet heard of an Indian being caught like that, and I do not believe it will ever happen because the Indians would collaborate with the Americans and not with the Indian government. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the person who wrote about the black swan, has an interesting hypothesis that the obstinate will inherit the earth. In his yet-to-be-published book, Skin in the Game, he talks about how an inflexible minority is able to impose its will on a majority, which ends up accommodating difficult behavior on the part of the minority. This is what Dharmic people in the US have to do. If you agitate regularly to get your views proper respect, the other side will eventually give in. I'm aware that there are difficult academic and other opponents, namely people such as the New York Times and the Deep State, but, and has been demonstrated in the recent Caffeine lawsuit. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a lawsuit brought by parents in California saying that the textbooks are extremely biased against Hinduism and portrayed in a very negative light. And I think the federal judge who heard it ruled that, in fact, it violated the First Amendment rights of Hindus. And so that's an interesting outcome. My friend Narayan Komrat, on the other hand, who will be here later, speaks about how hard it is to get even Hindu temples to distribute his book on Sanatana Dharma. For some reason, we're very diffident about our own culture and its accomplishments. The wealth of knowledge created in India is unknown in the West, indeed to most Indians. Panini's grammar, which I'm sure there will be some conversation about later, of 500 BCE, is probably the single greatest invention of all time by an individual. It achieves a grand united theory of language by postulating context-free grammars, something that had been rediscovered by computer scientists 2,500 years later, as my friend Subhash Kak has pointed out. Similarly, the discovery of infinite series for trigonometric functions by Madhava of the Kerala School of Mathematics and Astronomy around 1370 predates their use by Newton and Leibniz some centuries later to arrive at the calculus. Unfortunately, the infinite series also had a negative consequence for India because using them, Europeans could navigate the open ocean which meant that colonialism became feasible. There are a number of such brilliant discoveries and inventions by Indians that we do not know. And part of the reason is that even if they're talked about, it's usually only in English and not in Indian languages. So one of the things I would request, and in fact urge all of you to do, is to encourage the creation of knowledge, or at least its translation into Indian languages. People like Dr. Cha have talked about, automatic translation, which is great. But until that happens, I think we should make a point of publishing in Indian languages. The second thing that annoys me or saddens me is the notion that people do not understand that India is exceptional, that it is a holy land. Whenever I hear Indians blindly say that the holy land is the area around Israel, I'm aghast, because it's again something that we require in English. Whose holy land is it, I ask? For 1 billion Indians, for hundreds of millions of others in Asia, India is the holy land. And the point is that we need to market that. We need to learn from Americans, who are the masters of marketing. And this diffidence that we have is a handicap. One simple example of how we've been outmarketed, and in fact collaborating with it, is the neologism South Asia. Contrast it with the other term, Greater India. It's obvious which of these is more useful to us. South Asia, a term that was created by Cold War Americans and popularized most vigorously by China and Pakistan, is a meaningless term that has now replaced the Indian subcontinent. You can't see this, but this is a Google search trends. Where is South Asia used the most? Surprise, surprise, by Pakistan, okay, and also by America. So it destroys our brand. The term India has a real brand, and the attempt here is to submerge the India brand in this vague South Asia thing. And nobody talks about East Asia. When you want to say China, you say China, right? And in fact, they created a new brand, Greater China, which includes Hong Kong, Singapore, etc. Very clever. So they have diluted our brand and created their own. And Pakistanis occasionally call the Indian Ocean the South Asian Ocean. The Indian elephant is now the Asian elephant. The Indian tiger is the Bengal tiger. And I went to Indonesia, and they call the Indian Ocean the Indonesian Ocean, right? So our brand, of course, this is something that is remarkable. The Indian Ocean is the only ocean named after a nation, right? And going by what the Chinese are doing to the South China Sea, because the name is China, and they think they own it. Therefore, taking that one step further, we own the Indian Ocean. We really should. In the meantime, the term Greater India, which used to mean India's cultural hinterland, all the way from Afghanistan to Vietnam and the Philippines, has vanished. And so I implore you to expunge the term South Asia from vocabularies and to actively use Greater India and Indo-Pacific as much as possible. And that makes sense because, in fact, the action is going to be in the Indian Ocean, including Southeast Asia and Africa as we move forward. And that brings me to my next topic, which is geostrategy, Indo-exceptionalism, and the dominant crime narrative. Geostrategy will get increasingly important in the coming years as there will be a quantum shift in world power equations. On the one hand, the great importance of oil will wane. This is the first mega trend that will affect many other things in the world, because for the last half century, the world has in effect revolved around the quest for oil. Through thick and thin, the US supported Saudi Arabia as a keeper of the oil reserves. But now, the US has plenty of shale oil and gas, and it doesn't need OPEC or the Saudis much anymore. And you've seen this in Yemen. The Saudis are fighting a deadly war in Yemen. The Americans are not supporting them so much anymore. And so that is a harbinger of the fact that this megatrend, the eclipse of oil, is on its way. Another megatrend will be the continuing decline of America and the rise of the entire Indo-Pacific. Like all major powers, the US attempted to remake the world in ways that were advantageous to it. There is the Washington Consensus, including the World Bank, the IMF, WTO, etc. Now China is contesting it with its own entities like the BRICS Bank, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and so on. To be a leader in this kind of war, a great power has to have both hard and soft power. America continues to have significantly greater hard power than China, and it also has greater soft power, but the latter is building up its armed forces, especially its navy. And in addition, with its proxies, Pakistan and North Korea, it's able to checkmate the only two large Asian powers capable of challenging its hegemony, India and Japan, respectively. There's also a big question mark about the utility of the much ballyhooed OBOR. China seems to be projecting far into the future the current patterns of manufacturing and trade in supply chains, oil, and the possibility that it will be able to continue to be the manufacturer to the world. Neither of these is necessarily going to be true in the next 10, 15 years. For example, with 3D printing, you'll find that a lot of manufacturing moves closer to where the consumers are, from China to America and so forth. India will be the largest economy, or third largest economy, but it doesn't have the ability to buy allegiance through spending money, which is what China is doing through OBOR and so forth. It's spending enormous amounts of money on infrastructure and attempting to capture people. So, for example, in Sri Lanka, they built this port called Hambantota, which the Sri Lankans will never be able to pay for, and therefore their mortgage to to China. And in fact, they have now ceded that port to China. Similarly, Gwalior in Pakistan. So, if you look back, there is now a tendency to talk about the Confucian work ethic, just like the rise of the US was explained by the Protestant work ethic. As India rises, there will have to be a similar foundation myth. I wrote about the Hindu work ethic as early as 1995 for the journal Hinduism Today, but I am unable to find much else in a Google search. I said at the time that the hallmarks of this Hindu work ethic are thrift, hard work, sense of duty, respect for the family unit, respect for education, mathematical skills, and entrepreneurial skills. In common with the work ethic of the Confucians, it also has elements of a reverence for a strong family ties and affinity towards the group. But the point is that almost nobody in the West knows about this. Thanks to biased and motivated academics and a broad anti-Hindu agenda in the media, almost nothing positive about Hindus comes out. So this foundation myth is one part. This work ethic foundation myth is one of the pieces that I believe needs to be manufactured in the broader quest for Hindu exceptionalism in comparison with American exceptionalism and Chinese exceptionalism. And these myths are powerful magnets, as well as something that invites superior performance on the part of the people concerned and the unity of purpose on their part. And recently, an Arab-American author named Shadi Hamid wrote a book about Islamic exceptionalism, how the struggle over Islam is reshaping the world. So I'm going to leave this open challenge to the scholars here. Who among you is going to articulate Hindu exceptionalism and write a powerful book about that? I'd be willing to cooperate with you, whoever it is who wants to work on that. In fact, Hinduism is exceptional. It is the only ancient religion that has survived the assaults of all three of the Abrahamic faiths, excluding Judaism from this. So it's Islam, Christianity, and communism. And as you know, communism is pretty much an Abrahamic religion, minus God. While the old religions in Persia and Egypt succumbed to Islam, and Buddhism in Central Asia was eradicated, and South Korea seriously endangered by Christians, Hindus have survived, more or less, but with a certain amount of loss, it still survives. And beyond that survival exceptionalism, there is the entire theology that is far more suitable for science and modernity in the spirit of inquiry and free thinking than Abrahamic ideas. A number of Hindu ideas are now reflected in advanced areas of science. One of the attractions of Hinduism is that it's not a dogmatic belief system that demands absolute acceptance of certain axioms and articles of faith. I would like to request that the lights be put on because these slides are not all that important, right? And I don't want to all go to sleep listening to my mesmerizing voice, I guess. So, some years ago, Carl Sagan marveled at how Hindu cosmology is not in conflict with science, as opposed to, say, the creation of Christianity that maintains that the world is created. Thank you. On October 23rd, 4004 BCE, precisely at 10 a.m. Sanskrit scholar and computer scientist Subhash Kak has identified verses in Sayana's commentary on the Rig Veda that suggest that the 14th century seer had correctly interpreted the speed of light with an error of a few percent, with absolutely no scientific instruments at hand. Professor Clark's interpretation was that Sayana had managed to integrate himself into a cosmic consciousness that pervades the universe. A cosmic consciousness? That sounds like hocus pocus, many people may say. Interestingly enough, there are people on the cutting edge of physics, and David will be able to substantiate this, that are talking along those lines. In a recent article titled, "The Universe May Be Conscious," prominent scientists state, it was said that famous physicist Roger Penrose and John Archibald Wheeler, who came with the term black hole, suggested consciousness is inherent in complex systems. Others suggested that missing dark matter will make up 95% of the mass of the universe, and that it is a proto-consciousness. And this also fits in with Ray Kurzweil's ideas about intelligence emanating from the planet once a singularity sets in. None of this will faze Hindus, nor will the curious idea of multiverses. Astrophysicists have been unable to explain why certain fundamental constants or values are precisely tuned to support life as we know it. If they had values that differ even slightly of the order of 10 to the minus 20, and that's a very minuscule amount, then life could not exist. This has led to the suggestion that there are infinitely many universes that have different values for these constants. And that would be perfectly fine with Hindus because we're used to the fact that we're not particularly unique and that the universe and the creator and the creation Brahman are vast. These extraordinary ideas may also be included in the Hindu exceptionalism meme, but the ultimate goal of the Hindu work ethic and the Hindu exceptionalism idea is to propagate a dharmic grand narrative to compete with the American and the Chinese grand narratives. The cogent narrative serves two agendas. One is as a source of soft power, and the other is as the glue that attracts others to be satellites. The American grand narrative is incredibly powerful with its land of the free, meme, as well as Hollywood, rock music, blue jeans, Silicon Valley, all of which exert a magnetic attraction for outsiders. The Chinese grand narrative is not quite so appealing, but it still appears to be a model, especially for Asians, but not so enamored of the West. And even China's arrogant bullying of its neighbors in the South China Seas gave it a particular cachet. However, there is an interesting but frightening scenario that the two of these may go to war. Some of you may have heard of the Thucydides trap, whereby it is suggested that it is inevitable or highly likely that the two will go to war, either a shooting war or a trade war. Now, what should India do if such a thing happens? It should keep very quiet and try to avoid being collateral damage. That is the best thing to do. And going back to the whole idea of superpower down, we need this grand narrative. And the grand narrative needs to have an economic rationale, and that's where the Hindu work ethic comes into the picture. A political rationale, and this is democracy for us, because unbeknownst to many of us, democracy has existed in India for a very long time. For example, there are carvings on temple walls in a place called Uttamilur in Tamil Nadu that talk about how a village democracy should function. It talks about the qualifications of people who will be elected to the council. It talks about what happens when they are habitually absent and what to do with them if they're drunk and so forth. So democracy is something that we actually have inbuilt into our narrative. And the cultural rationale should be Sanskrit. In fact, we should have a powerful cultural outreach program. Well, I call them Kalidasa centers, just like the Max Muller Collins or the Alliance Francaise or the Confucius, whatever it's called, Confucius centers that are now being created. The fact is that all of Asia, especially in India and points east, have had a dharmic core. And even today, despite the fact that China is strongly authoritarian communist, I believe there is an opportunity for us to influence China. It is said that India conquered, quote-unquote, China 2,500 years ago with Buddhism, and it may be possible to recreate that with the dharmic narrative. Professor Vaidyanathan of IIM Bangalore recently suggested that the Chinese public, hungry for spirituality, could well be proselytized by this dharmic perspective, and in better hurry because the fastest growing religion in China is Christianity. Well, it's an interesting Christianity. It doesn't report to the Vatican, it reports to the Communist Party, which is kind of interesting. So what are the contours with dharmic narrative to conclude on that? Its outlines are not very clear, but it harks back to what's common among the Asian dharmic groups. Qualities of self-sacrifice, obedience, concern for the greater good of the family and the group, respect for education, and humility. They also treat artha as a legitimate goal, although, of course, they hold that the greatest bliss may be that of renunciation. It could also highlight that which made these Dharmic societies prosper in centuries past. A social contract wherein the citizen accepted certain limits on his or her own freedom in return for the protection by the state. That, of course, doesn't mean that the state should be imperial or despotic or whimsical, but that the social contract is a win-win proposition. Undoubtedly, there are many such ideas that can be explored. If we succeed in putting together an appealing Dharmic narrative, it would coincide with the Indo-Pacific century and the return of India to the historic roles at the center of the global narrative. And let me move to my final topic in about 6 minutes. It's about Vedanta, traditional knowledge systems, and practical applications. Vedanta, at least in my reading, includes not only philosophy but also the myriad practices that constitute Indian culture, much of which is empirically proven to be correct over centuries of evidence-based observation. Unfortunately, in a headlong rush to quote-unquote modernize, we seem to have abandoned many of these, and we're the poorer for it. In addition, a great deal of Indian knowledge has been digested and usurped, unattributed, into the Western canon. It's time for us to look at how to at least preserve that which remains. I've been heartened by what Professor Balram Singh told me about the interdisciplinary efforts of the Institute of Advanced Studies that is undertaking in areas as diverse as education and medicine. Digestion, however, is proceeding rapidly, and it's not only in visible areas such as yoga and meditation, but also on a micro level with a wholesale appropriation of Hindu artifacts by others. I live in Kerala and I see this on a daily basis. Hindu cuisine has been diluted as Kerala cuisine first, and now it's Syrian Christian cuisine, which is interesting. Hindu Dvajastambhas are now appearing in every church. Over the last 10 years, every church now has a golden Dvajastambha flagpole, whereas for Hindu temples it's not into there is Jesus Kathakali, there's Jesus Ragas, Jesus Bharatanatyam, the temple Panchavati, which is the 5 instruments in the music, temple music, Vidyarambha. They do Vidyarambha, which is saying Om Sri Ganapataya Namah, they say Om Sri Jesus Ayana on the same day. Okay, they do that. I mean, it's wholesale capture of Indic ideas. So they captured a great deal of culture, and eventually it'll be rebranded with the Hindu origins erased. Now they've done this before, they know how to do this. If you go to Rome, you see that every pagan building has a cross on top of it. Right? They've just taken them, and that's a great fear that I have. There are also clear consequences to losing traditional knowledge, as we've seen in the cases of neem and turmeric patents, which were fortunately foiled by centuries-old texts. There was a text called the Hortus Malabaricus, which was written in 1500 or so, sorry, 1700, in Latin actually, but that covers the entire flora of the Western Ghats, and that's a tremendous resource against the advantage of botanical medicinal knowledge, because only written evidence is acceptable in what's considered intellectual property today. Disappearing traditional practices are a loss of heritage. There are many other areas where traditional practices are noticeably better than modern mechanisms. One is in agriculture. The Center for Policy Studies in Chennai has done a lot of research in this. They found that the yields in paddy in Tamil Nadu in historic times were much better than they are now, despite the fact that they were organic and used neither chemical fertilizers nor pesticides. Besides, there were far more varieties of various crops being cultivated, which is a risk mitigation strategy against catastrophic pestilence. Animal husbandry is even worse. There is, of course, a great deal of noise in the global media about alleged cow-based violence in India, and most of it portrays Hindus as obscurantists, of course. The sad fact, though, is that the traditional Indian cow, the humped zebu, otherwise known as Bos taurus indicus, is fighting a losing battle with the imported Bos taurus, a slightly different species, examples of which include Jerseys and Holsteins. The imported cows are hybrids to give better quantities of milk per calf, And based on that, a large portion of the Indian cattle population has become hybrids. In Kerala, it's 97%. So traditional breeds are dying. But very interestingly, it turns out that Bos Taurus produces A1 milk, which is bad for you. And the Zebu, the Indian cow, produces A2 milk, which is superior. And I'm sure you can buy A2 milk by paying a lot more money in grocery stores here. Certainly you can do that in Europe. And it may not create type 1 diabetes. A2 is better at that. More intriguingly, there has never been a single case of mad cow disease among Indian cows, not one. There are potentially many reasons for that, but one is potentially genetic. 5 million were destroyed in Europe after 400,000 Bos Taurus European cows contracted the disease, and 177 people in the UK alone died of the human equivalent Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Yes, this is actually happening. It's hard to find a purebred Bos Indicas in India, even though there are many interesting properties that they have. They're much more heat resistant. In fact, Indica's varieties have been successfully introduced into warm areas. For example, as Brahma bulls in Texas, and is a predominant breed in Brazil, but they are being wiped out in India. Another example of modernity that has not necessarily improved things is in cesarean sections for pregnant women, which is partly a result of the government policy to send all women to hospital for delivery. Now, on the face of it, it's a good thing, but I think many of the infant mortality and maternal mortality results, which are quite good these days in Europe, they've improved a lot, would have come anyway with improved hygiene and a midwife at home. The problem with this cesarean section is that it afflicts children later in life because their gut microbiome is much poorer and less diverse. If they're born the natural way, they absorb good bacteria from their mother through their mouths and eyes. The cesarean section don't have that, so they become far more prone to allergies, asthma, Crohn's disease, maybe even Alzheimer's later in life. So here's a well-meaning thing that the government is imposing on people. And of course, you can't blame the government to explain totally, because many people would like to have their children born on a particular date of the nakshatra and so forth. So they prefer that. The doctors prefer it to because they don't have to get up in the middle of the night and come and deliver babies and just schedule it before their golf games or whatever. So that happens a lot, and it's actually an epidemic in India. There are many such examples. My mother grew up in a traditional joint matrilineal family and talks about how comfortable it was to be in a large household where all the sisters lived together with their husbands, and how there was always some aunt or cousin to help you if you were troubled, as opposed to the alienating nuclear families of today. Incidentally, the British banned matrilineal joint families in Malabar. The British also banned Kalaripayat, the traditional Kerala martial art, from which the East Asian martial arts and even acupressure are probably derived. Not satisfied, they also burned all the Ayurvedic manuscripts they could lay their hands on. And of course, it's not surprising behavior because they're the same people who banned the practice in Bengal of smearing people with cowpox, pus. Ayurvedic practitioners used to do that as a routine practice against smallpox. The British banned it as barbaric. But as soon as Edward Jenner rediscovered this, they called this great stuff. So cannot be surprised what the British did. I suggest these examples not to claim that everything Indian is ipso facto superior to everything in the West, but merely to point out that there are valuable ideas that we should be leveraging. For instance, intellectual property rights are closely guarded secret in the West. In India, they were sponsored by kings' temples, and they were put into the commons, being part of the public domain, and they didn't even sign their inventions. For example, Jagdish Chandra Bose, who invented the principles of wireless telephony, refused, precisely based on this principle, to patent them. And Guglielmo Marconi, who did patent the ideas, made a fortune. And today I see, to some extent, the epistemological engine of the West is grinding to a halt, partly because it seems to have reached the limits of the mechanistic Cartesian models, and I have reached the limits of my 45 minutes, so I will now conclude by talking just about one more point. There is a great book by a Stanford neuroscientist and primatologist named Robert Sapolsky, who talks about human behavior. He suggests that many connections between the various influences of humans and it's not just nature versus nurture, which of course is something that Vedanta has always espoused, connections, right? And Indrajalam, the Sapolsky's ideas remind me of Indrajalam, the Indra's net that again Rajiv Malhotra wrote in the book on recounting the recursive, infinite connectivity of the universe. Okay, so can Vedanta offer a different epistemological paradigm that may take into consideration intuition as well? We all know the stories of Srinivasa Ramanujan, who attributed his astonishing equations to his dreams in which the goddess of Namakala spoke to him, and nobody has a better explanation. Because the things that Ramanujan came up with were so incredible that they could only have been divine. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, if the universe itself has a consciousness pervading itself, it may only be necessary for us to tune our antenna to the right frequencies and to listen. And that is what meditation obviously is all about. So to conclude, Vedanta in a very broad sense is the essence of Dharmic civilization. It can be used as a defensive and offensive weapon in the rise of India, which is projected over the next few years. A fair amount of positioning and even marketing is necessary to convince the powers that be of the relevance and importance of both Vedanta and India. It has a number of lessons for the world in the time of technological breakthroughs using intelligent machines. However, unless these valuable ideas are forcefully propagated and positioned, they will not be appreciated, and furthermore, they're likely to be expropriated by others with no credit to Dharma. Therefore, a Dharmic grand narrative is very much required, and I invite all of you to participate in that creation of that way. Thank you very much.
Dr. Alex Hankey has been trained in theoretical physics from MIT, Stanford, and Cambridge University, the best we can ever think of. I don't know how he managed, but ultimately, as Rajesh Srinivasan was talking about, everybody ends up in India. So now he is in Bangalore and trying to understand the origins of thermodynamics, interpretation of quantum mechanics, and how to include all that in understanding cognition. So he is very well recognized person. He's very active in trying to integrate the knowledge system, Vedantic knowledge system of India, and into the modern physics, which I think, as somebody who is a biophysical chemist myself, does not seem to exist, but nevertheless can be talked about. So with those brief words.
Now I want to start by congratulating the last speaker on really raising extremely important, pertinent aspects. I want also to tell him that I passed by his Institute of Indian Management in Bangalore only yesterday morning on my way to the airport. So we have a common origin. He raised extremely important points which I shall address. But one of the most important things is this. There is this immense advance in modern computer science. It's often referred to as a philosophy of computationalism. And he quoted Deep Blue, this IBM computer, who actually Gary Kasparov accused of cheating in order at one stage to win win one of the matches against him. And whereas Gary Kasparov won his, I seem to remember, 4 games to 2, the computer only beat him 3.5 to 2.5. So we can think that Gary Kasparov ended up half a point and better over the best of 12 games against Deep Blue. Now, I have to tell you that the point of my talk is going to be to tell you that the human mind does not work on digital information. And anything that a computer can do in terms of calculation, the human mind clearly is not up to doing that in the same powerful way. Deep Blue and Gary Kasparov notwithstanding. But my message to you is that digital information is not the way the human mind behaves. I'm going to show you how and why the human mind actually cognizes forms directly. What I shall not have time to do is to tell you the stories of how human minds can transmit forms from mind to mind directly without any intermediary. And this is something that I'm afraid no computational computer, nothing even mentioned in the recent issue of MIT Technology Review, all about these very smart computers which can even report to you why they took certain decisions. Why did it choose to run over those 3 pedestrians? It will be able to tell you that. No computer is designed so that it can transmit ideas directly from mind to mind. But humans can do it, animals can do it, humans and animals can do it, and in fact I've been able to write a scientific paper, not yet published, on why human minds can do it in terms of the theoretical physics that I learned at MIT, Stanford, Cambridge, and the other places which our dear conference convener or chairman so kindly told us about. Now let me start the main part of my talk. That was just the circumambulation at the beginning. The real importance of Vedic Vidya is that it is the only philosophy that can guarantee the future of mankind. I would refer you all to some very important work done at the Stanford Research Institute in about 1968-69 by a futurologist called Willis Harman. Willis, spelled the obvious way, Harman, H-A-R-M-A-N. And in those years, Harman's futurological group studied the possible histories, futures of mankind, based on different possible philosophies that man might follow. Materialism, dialectical materialism, communism. I'm glad to say that the kind of ISIS philosophy was not available at that time, nor was North Korea so prominent as it is today. Humanism and religious philosophies, which usually end up in conflict with each other, as we are all too aware. And then finally, Philosophia Perennis, the perennial philosophy, as it was named by Italian philosophers in the Renaissance, which is embodied today in the motto, man is born to become divine, even if it takes him several hundred or thousand lifetimes to learn to rise to that level. This is the basic philosophy promoted by Swami Vivekananda, promoted by the Vedanta societies. I congratulate you all on being part of that movement. I urge you to spread this knowledge to all mankind, because this, according to Willis Harman, is the only knowledge that can guarantee the future of mankind. And despite Taoism in China currently repressed, despite Taoism in China being the one place alternate to India that really promotes this philosophy, India is the only country, and Indian citizens and Vedanta societies abroad is the only structure which supports this globally, and we have to promote it. It's our sacred duty not to Veda, not to Vedanta, but to mankind, to promote it to the utmost ability. I didn't know this when I joined Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's organization in 1972-73. I became a student of Vedanta, in a sense, when I first read Bhagavad Gita in 1970, long before I heard that it had actually been a book kept by my grandmother beside her bedside because she had, secretly, such a high regard for Lord Krishna. So, Sanatana Dhamma, the vision that the purpose of life is to grow in the stature of divinity, is the saving grace for mankind. I shall come back to that. I myself was very fortunate. I joined Maharishi International University in Santa Barbara in 1973 during my time at Stanford Linear Accelerator, just 200 or 300 miles to the north. And Maharishi gave us instructions. He gave it to all the new faculty in the sciences. He said, I want you to pursue analogies between the Vedic sciences and the modern sciences. And I want you to find the parallels so that when you give your lectures at MIU, Maharishi International University, you can draw out those parallels to show the scientific nature of the Vedic sciences in terms of modern science. And later I was very fortunate to be chosen as a young physicist to help when he was teaching his Vedic studies program in Switzerland with the help of such luminaries as Brahmarshi Devrat, who made the first recording of Rig Veda on videotape, and who was himself a student of Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni of fame in Ramana Maharshi's organization. So I feel that the heritage of this whole system comes from much more than the Jyotirmat in the Himalayas, which was where Maharshi's master was, the Shankaracharya. It comes from the deep tradition of southern India as well, and I could give you various quotations about that. So now let me tell you the basic thing I have concluded from 45 years study of the parallels between the Vedic sciences and the modern sciences. This may sound a little surprising to you. The Vedic sciences are much more powerful than the modern sciences. They are far in advance of the modern sciences, and I will tell you this. If you remember nothing else from this talk, please remember this. The Vedic sciences distinguish between the Sthula and the Sukshma. There is the gross physical reality that we see through our eyes, we hear through our ears, we touch with our skin, and so on, and which we allow to touch us more internally on a Sukshma level, and we taste and we smell, and so on. The Western sciences limits itself to that. And of course the atomic physics, which is also on a Sthula level, despite it being quantum theory. But the Vedic sciences distinguish between many levels of Sukshma. And what can be said at the outset is this: the Sukshma level controls the Sthula level. In yoga medicine, which we practice at Swami Vivekananda Yoga Anusandhan Sanstana, where I work, SVASA in Bangalore, it is recognized that if you can master the prana through pranayama, the sukha pranayama, and things like Kapalabhati, which isn't exactly a pranayama, it's a yoga kriya, and as we all know, taught famously by Swami Ramdev. When you master prana, the whole organization of the body falls into place. Why? The Sukshma controls the Sthula. If you master the Sukshma levels, everything falls into place at the Stula level. The Vedic sciences are much more powerful than the modern sciences. The modern sciences limit themselves to various levels of Stula. The Vedic sciences start at the Sukshma level. That is why Ayurveda can cure chronic illness and modern medicine regards it as chronic disease. Non-communicable diseases are curable. I give you one example. I have a student in the city of Bhopal who practices what she calls herbal juice medicine. She has 5 clinics, Rasahar Kendra, Rasahar herbal juices. When she takes a kidney patient, and she has a couple of examples like this, she's cured 40 or 50 of them over the years, you have, from your perspective, a point where they go from being compliant, the creatinine level, the marker for kidney disease, is coming down. They go non-compliant, it goes up again. Compliant, it comes down again. Non-compliant, it goes up again. Compliant, it goes down again. You can do any number of randomized, controlled medical trials. It gives you data. It proves something statistically, or doesn't prove it because it's only statistical. But if you show this kind of compliant, non-compliant, compliant behavior to a doctor, he's much more interested in the case study because he can see what's going on from that graph and it's really happening. Ayurveda is much more powerful than modern medicine. Shh. Don't tell the American Medical Society or they will ban it like everything else. So keep it a well-held Vedanta secret. Make sure you do your Ayurveda, you take your Chyavanprash, your Brahmi Rasayana, and anything else that takes your fancy. I take herbal juices, 3 of them, and my Chyavanprash every day that I'm in India. Okay, so that's a little bit of beginning for the talk, and I'm probably almost halfway through my time. Yes. All right, so let's talk about complexity and its approach to cognition. Vedanta and the theory of forms. Here is some background. I won't bore you with it, but I've published 8 or 9 papers in this series, some of them in company with my student who will be talking, and she won't be appearing before you. She's meant to be talking remotely this afternoon, probably tomorrow. And Vedanta, I started reading Bhagavad Gita in 1970 myself. What is the fundamental idea? Previously, it's been shown that complexity biology produces new information states. It's a very extraordinary fact that biological organisms like to give themselves choice of what they're going to do. We all believe we're going to go to the fridge in the morning and we actually can choose whether we have apple juice or orange juice. It's not some ghastly mechanism. We like to think, and it certainly feels, when we're not completely neurotic, it certainly feels like we have some choice. And we know that if someone becomes obsessive compulsive, where they don't have choice, that is a pathology. I just quote this psychopathology perspective, because it may give you an understanding that as you go from mere consciousness to super consciousness, as sometimes it's called in Vedanta, you're getting more freedom of choice. Okay? You're purifying yourself of the chitta-vrittis, which are limiting your choice. The chitta-vritti says, oh, you always have orange juice, you've got no choice. But you say, I'm going to choose the apple juice this morning, as I think I did at the hotel. We do have choice. Well, the funny thing is, you can see on that basis that we pursue purpose. We have our dharma. We have our purpose in life. to use one of the translations of the word Dharma. We follow our Dharma. Better if it's a Sanatana Dharma. And we are on the path to moksha. Now, granted that that is true, and they take pictures of single cells. I told someone this morning, you can take a picture of a white blood cell chasing an invader in the bloodstream, and it's obviously pursuing the invader and brushing aside the red blood cells, the erythrocytes, in order to catch it. And the poor little invader is desperately trying to escape being engulfed. Even according to what I'm going to tell you this morning, single cells have choices and apparently can make them and pursue their purpose. And in the case of the white blood cell, it's Dharma. Okay, so why should this be possible? It turns out that there is a law of complexity biology. Biological systems like to structure themselves so that they control their functions from an instability point. Now, the instability point lies at the first discovery of complexity. It's called the edge of chaos. If you want to understand the edge of chaos, I will tell you the story of how I first went to India in this current incarnation, meaning since the year 2000. In 2006, April, I spent a month at the University of Pune with my dear friend, Professor Bhushan Katwada, director of the program for medical sciences, and a biochemist, pharmaceutical biochemist. And he took me down one day to Mumbai, together with a professor of law who was about to argue a case in front of the Maharashtra High Court. We hadn't been going half an hour, and they turned to me and they said, "What do you think of the traffic on the Indian roads?" And naturally, I was rather embarrassed. I didn't want to admit too much at that point what I thought of the traffic to two relative strangers. Then I remembered I had been looking at the paper. So I got out the paper and I opened the page, and it said, "Chaos on the roads." Everyone laughed. But now I have revised my opinion. It's not chaos on the roads. It's edge of chaos on the roads. Do you understand? Edge of chaos on the roads. Everyone drives to see what they can get away with, exactly. Especially if there's no policeman. And, you know, I can tell you this story because I love India. We all love India. And India's traditions are very close to our heart. Not just Vedanta, but modern things as well. So, organisms follow that lead, or we follow the lead of organisms maybe. We function at the edge of chaos. And what I want to show you today, lower down that slide on the screen, is that there are new information states, new kinds of information states that describe pure consciousness. That will actually be much of my students' talk. They explain self-awareness, and they also, and this is the important point, they don't encode digital information, they encode forms directly. How do we know they encode forms? I will tell you one of Rupert Sheldrake's stories. There's a lady in South Africa who had a pet parrot called Nkosi. And Nkosi was an African grey parrot which had the largest vocabularies of any kind of species other than a human being, particularly parrots, who already have quite good vocabularies. And the owner could go to Nkosi and say, "Nkosi, I'm off to the supermarket." And Nkosi would say, "Yes, don't forget my nuts." So Nkosi could form sentences, hold conversations, could understand 1,500 words. And on one occasion, the parrot was sitting in a separate room, and as her owner was leafing through the pages of a picture book, the parrot could call out of sight in the other room the names of the objects in the pictures that she recognized in her owner's mind. This kind of direct communication from person to animal is not unusual. Rupert Sheldrake has written a really wonderful book about it. I tell you the title: Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. The dog would go and sit by the door when the owner went to pick up his overcoat in the office. Knew what was going on in his owner's mind, go and sit by the door. Amazing. Inconceivable that any kind of computer based on digital information could have that kind of what I call direct mind-to-mind communication. But my student and her guru in Maharashtra and in that kind of communication constantly, and she will have a question arise in her mind in meditation. She gets a call from her guru, who is the current inheritor of the Santa Gnaneshwara tradition, and he will explain without reference. He will explain to her the point that came up in her mind. So many of us will take these phenomena for granted, and I believe that this really distinguishes us from anything of which computationalism is capable. So, having said that, let me come to this instability physics. It's dominated by what is called critical points. Critical points are something on which I wrote my PhD at MIT under after I'd studied for a year or so with Stephen Weinberg. I was very fortunate to meet Gene Stanley for a summer school. He later became head of material science at Boston University. And we studied critical points, which are instability points. So instability physics is part of my intellectual upbringing. I'm very fortunate. And they're dominated by what is called critical point correlations, which incorporate very long-range coherence, which is to say that what happens over here in the sample is absolutely correlated with what is going on over there. Very slow loss of correlations. So the whole thing is completely integrated. It's completely, in that sense, holistic. You can't reduce the system to individual, what in quantum theory we call basis states. The physics is non-reductive. It's completely unique in physics for being completely holistic. This is the physics that we have at the basis of our individual consciousness. It's non-reductive. It's holistic. It comprehends things as wholes. It starts with a whole. Now, it actually turns out that everything in these states satisfies various criteria laid out by modern philosopher David Chalmers and his colleague, who was my colleague at MIU, Jonathan Shear. David Chalmers wrote a PhD back in about 1993-4, where he set out the basic principles that any theory of consciousness would have to satisfy. One of them was rather like the psychophysiological principle. Different conscious states would correspond to different brain states. The structural coherence of the information. Then he said any information theory should be a double aspect information theory. And the structure of information that I have derived for instabilities has two aspects. It has a, if you look at that purple arrow, it has a loop at the left-hand end I put this way round, and a double arrow. The loop represents an internal feedback loop, which is internal to the information state. Now, one of the great mysteries of conscious experience is, how do we have self-awareness? Well, many people have written about this. There's a famous neurophysiologist and consciousness theorist in America called Antonio Damasio. He wrote a famous book called Self Comes to Mind. He distinguished between the core self, what are the three? The core self and the autobiographical self, and there's one more kind of self which doesn't come to mind at the moment. And he didn't link the sense of self deeply into the information states. After all, we know when Brigu was sent to by his father, Lord Viruna, to meditate in the wilderness and to perform sadhana. Brigu comes back and father says, "Who are you, my son?" "Oh, I'm a physical body." "Very good, my boy. He didn't tell him he was wrong. Go back and meditate some more." He comes back. "Who are you, my son?" "Oh, I am the prana." He could feel that the prana was actually more fundamental than the physical body. "Very good, my son. Go back and meditate." He comes back. "Who are you, my son?" "Oh, I am the mind." He could feel that the emotions, the mind, were controlling the prana. If you could regulate the emotions, you could maximize the pranic energy, healthier, bliss, more fullness, purna. "Very good, my son. Go back and meditate." He goes back for another 3 months, 6 months. He comes back. "Who are you, my son?" "I am the buddhi. I am the intellect, which controls the mind." "Very good, my son. And go back and meditate some more." "Who are you, my son?" "Ah, aham bhuvam bhuvanasha vyabhavam. I am everything, I am beyond. I am beyond this all. I am this all." The poor computer will never have that experience. So the moral is that these information states can not only couple into human minds, they can couple into the cosmic mind. They couple into human minds based on the same level which gives rise to the chitta-vrittis. The chitta-vrittis are ideas. They come when you don't want them. You're sitting, you'd like the mind to be quiet in meditation, and it goes, "Well, don't you remember what happened? What's for dinner?" And then you settle, hopefully, maybe with the help of a little sukha pranayama. And you get a much deeper, more appreciative sense for the inner silence, for the inner bliss which attracts the mind. If you're lucky, you reach that stage which was said by Ramana Maharshi. He was asked by Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni, "Pray tell me, sir, what is tapas?" And to cut a long story short, because it lasted 15 minutes of intense inspection of this questioner, and he broke 8 years manam to give the answer. That's the degree of importance of the question. "Sir, what is tapas?" Tapas is when the mind merges with its source. Then he thought a bit and he gave, tapas is when the mind merges with the source of the mantra sound. In other words, this is Korea. The real meaning of tapas is not flagellation. It's not hooking yourself through wires through your back muscles to pull rickshaws along, as they do in Calcutta, as I'm sure you will see. Tapas is when you turn the mind, pratyahara, away from the outside world, and you reach the deep inner silence, which is the true source of Shanti. Every time we say salam, shalom, may the peace of the Lord be with you, the peace that passeth all understanding. Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That is that level of peace at the source of God. That is explained to some tiny extent by the loop. We've written a paper showing that to describe transcendence, you reduce the length of the arrow to 0. And then you just get left with the loop. And Maharishi Mahesh Yogi would say, well, this is, in transcendence, pure self-referral consciousness, where the self experiences itself by itself. It's just, you indicated it, it's a loop. And when I discovered that there is a mathematical proof that I won't bore you with, that these information states, that instability, carry an internal loop, I said my own form of eureka. This tells us something entirely extraordinary, but actually just very natural and very ordinary. Human awareness carries an internal loop of consciousness, which carries self-awareness, internal to everything that we ever experience on the outside. We all will say, oh, I had to listen to this lecture this morning by this funny Englishman. He was the only person, not Indian, to speak all morning. And he gave us this funny scientific theory. But you know that you had the experience of sitting here having to listen to him. It's personal. It's personalized for all of us. It goes from present into memory that can be recalled. It's all very extraordinary. But this is part 1 of Vedanta. Part 2 is to say that the real basis for encoding of information is in ideas. I gave you a slightly exotic way of expressing it. But I want to say to you all here present, you are all bilingual. You have your mother tongue from your native place, wherever that might be or have been. All of us here can speak at least 2 languages. Now, how is it that you speak? What is the theory of Vach? The theory of Vach, speech, is contained in the Shiksha Vedanta. And Shiksha tells us, from somewhere within the Taittiriya Upanishad, if I remember rightly, it tells us that speech arises in 4 levels. It comes, well, let's go inwards first. What I'm speaking out, I know what to speak out because I'm listening on the inside. From Vaikari, I descend to Madhyama. I listen to Madhyama, tells me what to speak. But the buddhi is actually acting at a deeper level. It's got some ideas in mind about what I should be speaking next. So I speak out from that cognition of ideas which translates themselves into speech from the level of Vishyanti, which they put traditionally at the level of the heart, the hriday. And how do you know what ideas are going to be generated? Well, you have some overall campaign somewhere in a bunch of slides or notes on a piece of paper. And this tells you the structure of ideas to unfold from a level that's generally the source of all possible ideas, para. It's effectively empty. Maharishi used to call it, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi called it the field of all possibilities. It's got all possible ideas there. Anything that you might have thought and can remember, anything that you will think and will cognize, the gifts from on high, we hope, and everything else as well. Mozart used to be, was asked on one occasion, well, how do you write one of your symphonies? We said it's very simple. It comes to me like a ball of string. I want a symphony. And the good Lord would give him a symphony, but it wasn't what you would recognize as a symphony. He said it's just like a compact form. My only job is to unwind that ball of string. It came from Para to Pashanti, and then his Madhyama and his form of auditory perception and Vaikari, in this case musical instrumentation, allowed him to unwind that ball of string. I'm sure, sir, you could unwind your ball of string in Hindi or Sanskrit as well as in English. I can't do it in those languages so fluently, but I can do it in French. I can choose my translator here in order to get the right words pour les dire en français. Si je veux, if I want to. It's entirely at my choice. Your computer wallers, they have their languages in which to encode and instruct and decode out of the computer. If they program in Linux, it's a slightly different set of instructions from going into Microsoft's own arcane encodings. Okay? I just want to tell you that there are many ways of proving and establishing this, and I want to end up with one last one. Because everything is at the instabilities, and the instabilities turn out to have means of being what we call invariant under a dilatation operator, this enables the mind to recognize people at a distance. Okay? I can see Rama Subramanian over there, and I know his face because I've seen it many times before. But if I'm a computer working on digital information, I may recognize where the face is, but it takes much longer and much more computational power to identify it as Rama Subramanian's, or Ayala's, or whoever it might be. Okay? But if you are in the wilderness and you need to recognize one face as the tiger, predator, and the other as your baboon mother, it's instant. It has to be. It works at different distances. This scaling transformation, scaling symmetry, seeing things at different sizes, applies to visual information. We take it for granted. But it only does so because everything has scale symmetry, because it's, as it's called, scaling. Because it's located at an instability. If you happen to live in a penguin colony, and you walk 50 miles to get into the ocean and have your first meal for 6 months, as an emperor penguin mother does, you have to get back and find your husband, and you have to recognize his voice, one among 500,000, or whatever it is, 100,000, couple of 100,000. Having waddled back 50 miles across the ice. It's an incredible feat. But how on earth do you recognize the harmonics of your husband's voice, your mate's call, under those circumstances? Well, we all know you remember that record company? His master's voice. We take it for granted that we can tell our husband's voice, our mother's voice, our child's cry, even worse than mother-in-law's voice. Okay? We know the sounds and the tones of what they speak, no matter whether it's far away, soft, or near and clear. Scale symmetry. There are huge numbers of very good reasons why all this cognition is located at a critical instability which carries these wonderful properties of critical points. That's really about all I want to say. I won't go into all these things. I've told you most of these things. I just want to come back. I'd like to quote Thomas Traherne in reply to the quote you gave from John Donne. Thomas Traherne is a famous mystical poet from 17th century England. He described his consciousness. He said it did dilate itself in an instant and, like an undivided center, stand at once surrounding all eternity. The consciousness had this power to expand. This is one of the most accurate statements of Brahman consciousness I know in all the literature, including the Vedic literature, any other literature. Other people have written marvelous descriptions. Thomas Traherne, My Spirit. It's available on the internet. This is about stanza 6. I really recommend it. And interestingly, the poem is written in the style of John Donne. Well, it's not conscious style, but it's an incredibly intricate rhyming style. Beautiful, brilliant, for 7 or so stanzas. Let me just repeat this idea about the physics of the subtle. It's the most powerful thing, and it's much more powerful than modern science. And there is a way of extending it into quantum theory and extending quantum theory to couple with it, which is made possible by Vedanta. Again, I want to congratulate you all on being aspiring Vedantins. We are only all, I think, to speak in all modesty, aspiring Vedantins. And I want to repeat the vision of Willis Harmony. The only philosophy that will sustain mankind in the foreseeable future is the vision that man is born to become divine, and that we all fulfill the purpose of our lives by adhering to the vision of the perennial philosophy, the name of the book by Aldous Huxley, and to whatever form of Sanatana Dharma to which we have been fortunate enough to be inducted. Namaskar. Jai Hind.